2004 Nissan Titan spark plug replacements. I'm Brian Essex from How To Automotive, and I'm going to walk you through that process. So on the Nissan Titans with the 5.6 liter V8, spark plugs on this are not terribly hard to do. What we want to do to get started is come down to all of our coils here and unplug them. So the best way to do that is to actually take the connector and push it in towards it, and then push the little lock tab down and then pull off. And you'll do that on all eight of them. And then once you do the remove all the connectors, then we'll remove the 10 millimeter bolts that hold the coils down. Another tip that I wanted to give you guys is when you pull these connectors off, is try not to pull from the wires itself. Because what happens is the wires will pull out of the connectors, and they'll pull back just a hair where everything looks fine, but when you plug it in, the connector inside here won't make contact, and you'll have a misfire. So try to, when you disconnect these, try to actually use the plastic part of the connector. So go ahead and remove all the 10 millimeter bolts holding the coils on. I use an air ratchet, but you can do this all by hand if you choose. It'll take a little longer, but it can be done. Okay, now that you got the bolts out of the coils, what you're going to do is I like to kind of go in order and put them. So you're going to have to give them a little twist, and they kind of create like a vacuum seal in there. So you have to twist them and pull at the same time, and you break them free, and then you can just pull them out. And then what you want to do is you want to inspect the coils, and if the valve covers are leaking here, they have some seals that are in here, and they'll leak and they'll fill these tubes up with oil. So you want to inspect that, and if any of the tubes are full of oil, then you need to replace the valve cover gasket too, or else you'll end up, if you haven't destroyed the coil already, it will destroy the coil. So pull them out, and what I like to do is kind of lay them out in order. So I'll just lay them all out like this on my service card. This is on the driver's side bank, and this is the passenger side bank. And if you get these mixed up in any way, it's not really going to make a difference. This is just the way I work and do things, so I kind of like to lay them out. So an important tip is when you go to take your spark plugs out, especially these vehicles with aluminum cylinder heads, is the initial break free of the spark plug. You want to do it by hand with a ratchet like this. Never use an impact or air ratchet, because that initial burst of when you hit the trigger on a air ratchet or impact gun will actually rip the threads out of the cylinder head. So I always crack them free with my by hand with a hand ratchet, and then after that, once I get them cracked free, then I'll put my air ratchet on there and I'll run them out real slowly and run them out. So this is going to be my setup for removing these spark plugs. You're going to need a standard ratchet. This one happens to be a flex head, and it has a little 45 degree or 35 degree angle bend in the handle. It kind of helps. That's a nice handy tool for doing spark plugs. And then you're going to need a couple of extensions. Looks like I got about a 6-inch here and a 3-inch extension, and a standard 5/8 spark plug socket on this one. And also my extensions have what they call, they're like semi-wobble, so if you push them all the way on, they don't wobble. When you push it up just a little bit, then it has a little bit of wobble. It's a pretty neat little tool to have. And then an optional for this job is an air ratchet. So now that I got my spark plugs out, what I like to do is put them in order, in the firing order, and then you can take a look at them. And you look at the electrodes here and see how the car is actually running. So you can tell if it's running rich, you can tell if it's running lean, you can tell if the engine's burning oil, if it has some type of underlying problems like that, just by looking at the condition of the old spark plugs. And what you want to see is a light brown tint like this one is in a really nice condition, like indicates that this engine's been running pretty well. You can also tell when people run additives. It changes these electrodes, weird colors and stuff when people run fuel additives and stuff. So I'll check every one of them, and then that way I can kind of get an idea of how the actual overall engine is performing. So if they're all consistently like the same color and same look, then your engine's running in a pretty consistent, balanced condition. If you have one cylinder in the middle here that's like it's fouled out, or it could be a leaky injector, or it could be a coil not producing, or it could be like the engine, the piston rings or valve seats or whatever are leaking, and and you're building oil's consumption through the is getting onto the electrodes and stuff. So that can kind of give you an overall of how the engine is running. So the new spark plugs, they already come pre-gapped for this car. The NGKs that we have is the exact replacement for the ones we took out. And but if you were to drop this spark plug, or for some reason you think that the gap is off, you would need a tool like this, and each one of these is a different thickness, and you would place it in between, and you would adjust your spark plug gap. So you would check it with this, and then you would hook this in here like this, and you can bend the electrode out, or if it's too small, or you can, what I like to do is kind of lightly tap on it, and it'll tap the electrode in if it's the gap is too wide. So now we're about to go back in. Some people like to use anti-seize on the threads. I do not like to use it. If you look at the original spark plugs when they came out, they didn't have it on there. And you could tell because it would be coated, and that stuff would kind of dry on the threads, and you could tell if it had it or not. This car had the original plugs in it, and it did not have any anti-seize in it, and I'm not going to use it when going back in. That's just my personal preference and choice. But if you've heard different or believe different, by all means use the anti-seize. So what I like to do is I like to put my spark plugs in, start them by hand for a couple threads. Once I got a couple threads started by hand, then I'll use my air ratchet. But I'll run it in really slow. With very little pressure on the trigger, and you don't want them to torque down. So I just do them until they just touch. So you'll kind of hear it change the tone when it just touches. So now that it's just touched, what I do is by hand, you gotta crush the crush washer. I'll show you that on a new spark plug. So right here is the crush washer. So when you run this all the way in until it bottoms out, then you torque it down until this crush washer right here, it crushes. You can do it by feel. You can feel it crush down, and that helps seal it onto the block. And so you don't want to over tighten these spark plugs. And the best way to do these is hold it with one hand, and then on the opposite end you would hold it, support it with your other hand, and then torque it down. It's a little hard for me to do them and film at the same time. And you just turn them until it stops, and then you give it like a little quarter turn more, and you kind of feel you can actually feel it crushing. And like I said, don't over tighten. Okay, after you got all your spark plugs in and torqued down, now it's time to put the coils back in. And just like I laid them out in orders, but it doesn't matter if you mix them up; they're all the same really. So you go ahead and just reinstall them, push them into the seat. You can start your nut, bolt, and then you can go ahead and plug in plug the coil back in, and make sure you hear the click like that, and give them a little tug to make sure that they're not going to come back off. And the cool thing is, pretty much the wire loom will lay exactly the way you took it off. So it's like almost impossible to mix up the wires for the coils. But and that pretty much completes the process of changing the spark plugs on a 2004 Nissan Titan with the 5.6 liter V8. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive, and as always, it's my pleasure sharing my experience with you guys. I'd like to remind you to subscribe, and thank you again.